Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show we do every Thursday. My name is Adam Sturman. I'm a producer here with Promethean Action. Today, I am joined by Barbara Boyd, treasurer of Promethean PAC, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Susan just got a virus a few days ago. She went to the doctor. She's doing okay, but she is sleeping and recovering from that, unfortunately. I am joined by Michael Steger. You guys have probably seen him if you've been coming to our Monday shows. He also started his own YouTube channel, and he's posting much more on x.com. You should go check out his x.com profile. So he's going to be filling in for Susan today. So let me start everyone off with a quick update about what's happened in the last 24 hours. I think a lot of people know, but this will obviously set the stage for the discussion today. So the South Pars gas field. Yesterday, Israel struck its. Trump said, this really freaked out Trump, and there's conflicting reports. Trump said on the attack on the South Pars oil fields that no more attacks will be made by Israel without his approval. Iran turned around and struck Qatar's Ras Laffan, one of the world's biggest natural LNG terminals. I want to pull up real quick, because I didn't really know where any of this was, but just for a little bit of reference here. So the South Pars area is in that outline there, and especially the red blob, that's where the strikes took place. And the technology that they're using are they're using these underwater, they go here, let me show you. They use these underwater things to pull the gas. Iran basically has an underwater pipeline where they pull the liquid natural gas back on their shore. So that's kind of, I don't know where the strikes actually happened, but that's kind of what's going on with this Pars thing. It's located between Qatar and Iran, and they both seem to be pulling from it to some extent. So last night, Israel struck this preemptively, supposedly without Trump's knowledge, but there already are conflicting news reports saying that the Trump administration was in on it already. So that's an important thing. Axios was one of the things. Axios came out and reported the opposite. Axios said that U.S. and Israeli, quote unquote, officials coordinated the strike. Yep, Iran. Trump said, if Iran attacks the very innocent Qatar again, the U.S. will, quote, massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars gas field at an amount of strength and power that Iran has never seen. So obviously this spiked the oil price. China's trip is delayed. I don't know if people saw this over the last few days. So China delayed his trip to China by 5 or 6 weeks. The Joe Kent fallout continues. Tulsi Gabbard yesterday gave testimony in Congress. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on YouTube and x.com. As you're joining us on YouTube, please give us a like. I'm going to ask Barbara to give us any introduction here, because she had some other things she wanted to share, too.
Basically, I think we've got to sort of step back and look at the overall picture here. First and foremost, which most people know, what has been going on is, essentially a complete devastation of the Iranian regime. That's lost in the sauce of all of the cyber operation, actually saying, the United States is losing, Trump doesn't know what he's doing, the whole world economy is going to be destroyed and go into recession. There was no actual imminent threat from Iran. That's all of the cyber narrative, which has been bombarding people every single day. Now, what people don't understand is that the price at the pump really has nothing to do with actual physical what's there, oil or natural gas. Right here in Leesburg, Virginia, for example, the day the war started, gas, which was already in those pumps, I went to fill up my car that day, and it had already risen 50 cents. But the gas, if you think about it, had already been bought, paid for, and was sitting in that, gas thing that you use to fill up your car. Okay. So there's something going on here which has nothing to do with the actual physical production of natural gas and or oil. We are a net exporter. What we're doing affects the rest of the world most certainly, but there's a huge amount of profit going on and price gouging going on from the London spot market. Now, Secretary Bessent addressed this directly this morning. Adam, do you have that clip from Bessent on Mornings with Maria? Can you just show people?
Yeah, I do have the clip. Let me just go grab the timestamps that you wanted me to show real quick here.
Okay. I mean, what he's basically talking about is the difference between how much supply there is and what the administration is actually doing to head off all of the things which London and others can do to manipulate prices by actually increasing overall supply, not just, from, places in the Middle East, but also from the United States, from Japan. The Japanese prime minister, the new prime minister who loves Trump, is at the White House today. They have significant mining, deep water, anti-mine.
This morning was at 108. Crude oil is up.
And we'll just wait for a second.
Yeah, I have it ready whenever you are.
Okay, let's go. Let's just play it.
Plans to intervene in markets specifically. What conditions would force Treasury to intervene?
Well, Maria, we're talking about two things here. I think there's been some speculation that U.S. Treasury would intervene in the futures market, and we're absolutely not doing that. But we are intervening in markets by creating this excess supply with oil that's on the water. So, in essence, by the time we unsanction the floating Iranian oil, we would have intervened and we would have created about 260 million excess barrels of energy. And if you think that the temporary closure in the Strait is leading to about a 10 to 14 million barrel per day deficit, then that is, depending on how you count it, approximately three weeks of oil to stabilize the market. So that is a physical intervention. We are not going to do a financial market intervention. Maria, you get these price spikes. We got one Sunday 2 weeks ago.
Right.
It was a big price spike. Then we had the largest sell-off in history. And my 40 years in the market, I always found, especially people who work for me, when they lost a lot of money, they said that there was some mysterious intervention rather than bad trading. So to be clear, we're not intervening in the financial markets. We are supplying the physical markets.
Well, that's enough. I mean, so you see where the administration is actually focused here. He also announced that the Department of Agriculture will be working to bring the price of fertilizer down, which is a run-on actual impact of oil shortages and gas shortages. We saw the same thing, if people remember, with the Ukraine war. When the Ukraine war started, there was a huge, manipulation of the futures market by the City of London, and there were also complete run-on effects in terms of both, wheat and energy prices, because Russia was being taken off the market. Now we're putting Russia and Iran back on the market, and I don't think that's something that people who think that Israel is controlling things actually would have anticipated. But that's the overall framework. I said yesterday, Trump is really, testing and has tested NATO. He realizes, and his entire national security strategy says, Europe is screwed. All right, we'll try and help by setting an example, but we can't rely on them. We're spending billions of dollars and wasting billions of dollars on NATO. We've got to relook at this. And he did relook at it in his national security strategy. And he said, our emphasis militarily is right here. We want to get out of the Middle East. by actually producing more oil so we're not dependent on that entire thing. And the people who are dependent happen to be China, India, and other places who we'd like to have good relationships with. So, we're essentially trying to keep those oil and gas resources open, but our market right now, we're a net exporter of oil and natural gas. So the entire thing that's going on from the standpoint of hysteria is caused by this ancient City of London spot market pricing mechanism. And Trump is saying, hey, we're leaving all of that. So that's the overview. And Mike may have some additional things that he wants to say as the introduction.
Well, I think that covers the breaking news on the attack pretty well, the motivations and what's behind it. I think, this is, once Trump got into this, it's a chaotic situation, and there's a lot of emotion around it because it is war. It creates a certain kind of controlled chaos or an attempt to control chaos. I think we just have to keep a focus on the overall strategic perspective, and that's what Barbara's laying out. And if we can pull this off, if we can take the Iran question off the table, then Israel doesn't have this ability to keep, just like the British and the French in Ukraine. It's no different. People say Trump should pull away from Ukraine, just abandon it. But then the British and French push it more and more aggressively and suck us into an even more out of control war. So I think people have to kind of hold steady. There's going to be some bumps in the road. Israel clearly wants to drag us in and make it more destructive and make it more chaotic. They blew up their oil refinery near Tehran. Trump didn't like that. It's possible he didn't like this attack on the Pars field. But the question is, we've got to stay focused on the broader strategic war. So I think that's the basis for the discussion today.
Thank you, everyone. I want to give a few quick shout outs here. First, to Melody Hart. Thank you, Melody, for joining us every week. Paul Trainer, again, you've been with us from the very beginning. Thank you for your support. And Mark Shawnee, I thank you for this super amazing and generous super chat. Keep the great updates coming in real time. There's a lot of propaganda to stay ahead of, and you're making headway tamping down on the rumors. Thank you for all you do. God bless America. Thank you, Mark, for the very generous super chat. And I always try to tell people this. We couldn't have reached this success without people actually watching our videos, without people subscribing to our newsletter. I think we are literally just a few thousand away from reaching 500,000 followers, 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick, and let's see if some people on this thing can help us. Oh yeah, here it is. We're at 495,327. Can I pull up the live counter for it? So literally we are less than 5,000 YouTube subscribers away. If you've been watching our videos but haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. We do 3 political updates a week plus this live show. And I hope to be doing more shows in the future. We're working on that. And we also reached over 100,000 newsletter subscribers. So part of the reason why we're reaching so many people is because of you. So thank you, Mark, for watching us. I hope you're joining us for the midterm boot camp. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later, but we're doing our next midterm boot camp to try and get people more active in the world of politics instead of just, spending their time just consuming and being on the sidelines. So, okay, I think we have our opening here. We're going to go to the questions. We're going to start taking questions. The questions that we're going to be taking right now are going to be coming from our newsletter subscribers. We have a free newsletter. You can get the link is in the description. If you're not already on it, you don't have to worry about paying anything. Just get our free newsletter. It will allow us to stay in contact with you outside of the control of YouTube and Google. All right, so let's start with the first slide here. Okay, I'm going to read a few of these together here because So we got a whole bunch of questions on this, on what's going on in Iran and the role of NATO. So we had a lot of questions that overlap. So if you didn't see your question, please try to find your question somewhere in this. So the first one is from Max. How will the exposing of NATO and the European globalists affect our alliances? Will we be more aligned with the Middle East, Russia, and China? Okay, and I'm going to take number 2 here. So thank you, Gail. Since Trump has established the trade deal with Japan, why would it deny sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz? I understand they don't have anything to do with one another, but one would think Japan would want to maintain the overall alliance with the United States. Thank you. So Max and Gail. Barbara and Susan, I open this up to you. How is this, as we did our last briefing on the fact that Trump is seriously thinking about leaving NATO, how is this going to realign our alliances with other nations?
Well, you've got to look, people kind of neglect actually looking at the new national security strategy, which is on the White House website. It was released in December, and it freaked the works out because it said, here's where we're going. Here's our strategy. He laid it out. First and foremost, we are focused on the United States of America and on the economy of the United States of America, and raising the actual living wage of the working class of the United States of America is central to our national security strategy. I don't think anybody has ever heard that when you talk about national security before, but that's what the document actually said. Second, we're focused on our own hemisphere. Why? Well, because a lot of countries in our hemisphere under previous administrations became narco states. And we've been flooded with fentanyl and other drugs to basically kill our population, along with thousands and thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants who were entered into the country because of the open border policy. So Western Hemisphere, we're into removing the terrorist threat and the narco threat, which is proceeding. That's not covered a lot in the media, but it is proceeding. We're cooperating with Mexico. They've basically been decapitating the entire top of the cartel operation, sending people here to be prosecuted, cooperating in operations to take out the top honchos of the cartels. Maduro being taken out of Venezuela was a huge hit on how money and drugs are laundered, and the entire terror apparatus in our hemisphere. We obviously have a problem with Canada in that they are turning into the biggest, under Mark Carney, the biggest supporters of the modern British Empire. So Trump has talked about taking them over, taking Greenland over. He obviously anticipated that that was going to be a slight problem in terms of hemispheric defense. Finally, it says places that we are de-emphasizing. We're de-emphasizing Europe. That was right in the strategy. We're not doing NATO. What's the use of it? You had Vance going right to them in early, the first 2 months of the administration, March of 2025, saying you all are headed into the dark ages. Basically you're totalitarian governments at this point. What are we doing with you? That was the introduction to the security strategy. The Middle East, we want to get out of the Middle East. As I quoted in my video yesterday, the security strategy says, as we become dominant in energy, there's no reason for us to have thousands and thousands and thousands of troops in the Middle East. And Trump is actually moving to create peace, or has moved to create peace in the Middle East, both with force, i.e. military action against the people standing adamantly in the way, and through pulling all of the Gulf states together to actually create what he calls the Board of Peace and the new Abraham Accords to develop economically the entire area. So that's a long answer to what you're asking. Finally, in terms of Russia and China, this is very intriguing. It's not essentially what you get in the news media, okay, we're done with all these other enemies. Now let's attack the real enemy, which is China. Okay. Trump basically says, no, I want to have good relations with China. Why? Because we're, basically very dependent upon our trade with China still, and it's going to take a while to effectively become self-sufficient. We're overturning an entire globalist organization of our economy and the world's economy, and that's really the battlefield on which all of this is taking place. And it's been mooted that what he's talking about is something called the Core Five, which would be Russia, China, India, Japan, and the United States as kind of being a separate discussion forum and lever for developing the next stage of the world's economy. It's a completely different notion than what most people have been led to believe is in our strategic interest. But those nations combined represent the force which could actually develop the world and overturn this crazy British system once and for all. So that's a long answer to the question, but I sort of wanted to paint the overall strategic alignment here.
Thank you, Barbara. Any comments, Mike?
No, I think that covered it pretty well.
All righty. So let me just go through some super chats here. I'd like to give a quick shout out to PGEC. Thank you for joining us again. Hi, I hope Susan gets to feel better. Do you think the Iran situation ends soon and the crown prince takes over? I think this is something that a lot of people have been seeing on the news. What do you think our relationship will be with the crown prince and the future country of Iran?
Well, basically, the president has said he doesn't think the guy can actually carry the weight of the population in Iran after this relatively traumatic situation. He's clearly being pushed. That's why I get so irritated about Israel is controlling this, yada, da, 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 da. He's clearly being pushed by the neocon apparatus in Washington as the guy to come in and do regime change, all right? The Shah did a lot of really good things, but he also did a lot of really bad things. And one of which is Psyop, which was the secret police in that regime, which was incredibly brutal. If you want, something that, people still talk in horrific terms about. Torture was endemic within that regime. That's why Khomeini was actually able to stage a revolution in 1979. So Trump has basically said, no, it has to come from within the current Iranian population. We're not doing, substituting, a puppet of our own, onto the population. That's regime change. That's exactly what we did in Iraq and other places. We're looking for someone to arise in this situation as the population revolts from the regime that shows leadership qualities sufficient to actually run the country. If you look at Venezuela, we presently have a very decent relationship with the internal person who actually, Delcy Rodriguez, who actually replaced Maduro. She's a Maduro ally, or was, but she's working with the United States at this point to develop the country, and we're aiding that development, which is the way you actually want to go. So it's going to screw with people's perceptions. The Washington so-called Z-lobby crowd, the neocons, wanted to impose, people from outside the regime in Venezuela, and it never would have worked. It would have been, essentially, trying to do regime change, which never works out. So that's how I'd answer your question.
Thank you, Barbara. And we also have Jeff in Utah. Stop winning, Promethean. Too much winning. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us and our great viewers and readers. Like I said, we can't do any of this without you. And I hope you join us for our midterm boot camp tomorrow. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we're going to keep hitting on this Iran thing. And there are just so many bad takes on the internet right now. I'm just going to, these are two very popular people in the wider MAGA networks, internet networks, etc. Scott Ritter and Colonel Douglas Macgregor and others say that the US and Israel can't win this war and that they are running out of weapons and no allies are going to help. They say Iran will win. What's your opinion? Thanks, Grant.
Mike, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think people underestimating President Trump have lost every time for the last 10 years. I don't think President Trump took this action without having a clear sense that this could change the entire dynamic he's established in the Middle East. And what these guys ignore, and frankly, take Scott Ritter or Larry Johnson or Douglas Macgregor, and what's become very unclear for these guys is what they're fighting for. Because what President Trump is fighting for has become pretty clear. He's spent his entire 10 years, his first term, and certainly his focus into a second term, on stabilizing the Middle East region. The first trip he made was in Saudi Arabia in 2017 in May. It was to the Organization of Islamic Countries, from Indonesia to Morocco, were all in attendance. And he basically said, look, let's put aside this radical Islamic terror agenda. Let's end the support for these terrorist networks. And Trump was well aware at that time that Obama and Hillary had been backing up the terrorists in North Africa. They had backed up the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They had backed ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And that this was something that the United States had been complicit in. But he was going there and giving them a clear message that we're reorganizing this. We're ending this Islamic terror agenda. It goes back to the 70s. Zbigniew Brzezinski called this the crescent of crisis, an area from India to the Mediterranean that would be used to destabilize the region. This is the time when Iran and the Ayatollah regime is brought into power. So Trump is changing that 50-year geopolitical agenda. That's what he announced 10 years ago. And he's just clearly following through on that perspective. That gives you a strategic mapping. The strategic mapping for these other guys seems to be to equate that a lack of conflict. If we don't get into any conflict, then there's somehow peace. But you can't have peace simply by an absence of conflict. There has to be a collaborative and strategic mission to develop, to create shared prosperity, to create economic development. If you have a problem like Iran or like Venezuela that is going to disrupt your ability to create a region of economic development around nation states, not the caliphate, not some globalist ideology, not radical Islam, but around Arab nation states, around nation states throughout Southwest Asia, around economic development, then you don't have a mission. Trump has made that mission clear. So can he win this? He can clearly win this. He said over and over again, and Barbara said it at the beginning, what's the mission here? Degrade Iran's ability to project power in the region, period. So he's eliminating their Navy, their Air Force, their air defense systems. Now he's going after their aggressive and offensive weapons. And Iran now has to be very sparing. They're not launching massive amounts of missiles because every time they launch one, we lock on and look to target those launch capabilities. So the question is how rapidly this can be expedited. How much can we get a regime that will work with us? Because for President Trump, the clear metric is economic development. It is not a question of who ideologically is in the regime. If the Ayatollah could have talked to Trump the way Kim Jong-un could have and said, look, let's get an actual economic development perspective. He gave him 2 months of negotiations last year, and they failed to actually come to the table. They started the negotiations this time by saying we could have 10 nuclear weapons in the course of 2 weeks. Not a very positive perspective of economic development for Iran or the region, because they've assumed that the United States is somehow the fundamental problem. Maybe we were under Obama. Maybe we were under Bush. Maybe we've been a problem. You can't get around that. But what President Trump has brought to bear is something different. And unfortunately, people like Macgregor and Ritter just don't see the strategic change that President Trump has brought to the table. This changes the entire discussion in the Middle East. It changes the entire discussion in the Americas. He's put out policy frameworks like the national security strategy that make it very clear. People said, oh, but it's not clear. Trump's just shooting from the hip. He's now got clear documents. We're going to rebuild the United States, rebuild the middle class around manufacturing and industry, and we're going to offer that same perspective to other regions. So I just think that that's what these guys are missing. And that's why they've lost a lot of their political relevance.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you to everyone in our YouTube chat. I see so many familiar people every week. Thank you for coming back every week and for regulating on the chat. I think we're having less disruptors over the weeks. That's really good to see. So thank you, everyone. And drop us a like on YouTube on the way in. Okay, so we got some more super chats. I think have some pretty good questions here. So I'm going to take this next one. Funny to Thang. Thank you very much for the super chat and joining us. What do you mean Teddy Roosevelt and the Muslim Brotherhood are British agents? And why has the pound always been greater than the dollar? Thank you for all you do. And thank you for joining us, Funny. Please make sure you're subscribed. Barbara and Mike, your thoughts?
Well, Teddy Roosevelt is a favorite of various people in MAGA because he basically kind of reflected what I call something of the American cowboy ideology, which is, something we all kind of hold near and dear to our hearts at various points. But, in terms of what he actually did with national banking, in terms of what he actually did to set up, after the assassination of McKinley and everything that happened after that, he really had quite a bad record and could be shown to be really under the influence of the Morgan interests in the United States, which is the City of London and the modern British Empire. Concerning the Muslim Brotherhood, I've cited in my videos numerous books and everything else showing that this was a creation of what was called the Oriental Studies Department at the universities of Cambridge and Oxford. What they did is they went in and they did anthropological studies of all of the various religious currents in the Middle East, and came up with something that basically was created to be used as a tool against any secular nationalist government in the Middle East, to essentially create religious warfare, around the idea of a reconquest, if you will, of the Middle East by political Islam. And you had T.E. Lawrence of Arabia and all these other people actually involved in creating this. Bernard Lewis, as Mike mentioned, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Samuel Huntington picked up on it in the United States. Barack Obama loved them and used them throughout the Arab Spring to, again, destabilize the area. So if you really want a history of this, I recommend this book, Secret Affairs, by Mark Curtis. It's available on Amazon. And it uses British declassified documents to actually demonstrate how the Muslim Brotherhood came about. And it's a very convincing picture. Now, if you think about the revolution in Iran, that's also a pretty good demonstration of how this works. As soon as the Ayatollah came in and replaced the Shah, what do? Both Israel and MI6 were involved in coming in and saying, now you should go to war against Iraq. And that's what happened for 10 years. The first effort to actually destroy Saddam Hussein, because of the fact that at that point, the Ba'ath Party, which Saddam Hussein was the head of, actually wanted economic development for the entire area. And that was, the Ayatollah himself was part and parcel of the Muslim Brotherhood apparatus that the British created. So that's kind of why I say that. And I think we kind of can bring the receipts to actually show it. There's lots of other people who've covered this, but I think Mark Curtis overall is the best. I'll give you the best picture.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing on the Teddy Roosevelt side, because this gets at Trump's revival of the Monroe Doctrine and the Trump corollary. I mean, Trump has very much shifted the whole discussion of the Western Hemisphere away from what Teddy Roosevelt introduced, which was the Roosevelt corollary of gunboat diplomacy. We defended the rights of the South American nations to have independence. And once they gained it, we launched the Monroe Doctrine. We basically launched the Monroe Doctrine to say, now that the peoples of South America have risen up and kicked you out on their own behalf, we're now going to defend their rights to be sovereign nations, and you're going to stay out of the hemisphere. Teddy Roosevelt ended up saying, we're going to collect the debts of these European countries and corporations that you now have been admired in. So basically, we're now going to be the law enforcement or debt collection agency. And you can read, there's Smedley Butler, a highly decorated Marine Corps general. War is a racket. But the question is, this was a shift. This was when Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson became a tag team to shift the United States away from the American system. And what Trump has done is revive that here in the United States, ending this globalization racket. And then he's reasserted the real Monroe Doctrine. We're going to foster real development in the South Americas, and we're going to get rid of all these British socialist narco-terrorist operations that have kind of taken over the hemisphere. And I think that's a real kind of shifting point. And we all love cowboys, and we like the rugged individual who's actually going to fight on principle, regardless of what anyone says. But Teddy Roosevelt's policies, especially in the Americas, were a complete failure and a betrayal. It was the same kind of betrayal of us defending the French in Vietnam.
Thank you. Gonna hit some more super chats. Kaz Flanagan, the Crown Prince is not the Shah. Educated his entire life in the West and stated he will assist with the transition to democracy. Thank you, Kaz, for that clarification. Thank you for joining us and for fact checking. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Thank you. Fenderman, thank you for joining us again. My impression is that by the EU, Britain colonized Europe. The EU is now trying to expand further into the Middle East, flooding itself with immigrants from the Middle East. Please comment. I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think the EU is really totally in the driver's seat for this one. Barbara, your thoughts on who's really pushing this whole EU, Britain, where what's going on in the UK is crazy with their immigration policy. What's actually driving this? I have more questions on this we can bring up, but what's really driving this push for radical immigration?
Well, people like to criticize the Open Society foundations of George Soros without actually understanding the center of what he represents philosophically. He's a British agent. He's not, somebody who came into the United States and did his thing and funded the Democratic Party. Overall, his emphasis all along has been to use the money he got via, bankrupting the Bank of England temporarily to create a whole new vision of society, amongst which the key foundational idea is open borders. Why does he support open borders? Because it destroys nation states. It's really that simple. It destroys the nation state. It creates the basis for doing what the British have always had as their strategy: destroy the nation state and create kind of smaller communitarian tribal enclaves where people have appropriate technologies and they can be effectively managed. That's the Open Society plan of attack. And that's essentially what the EU, through buying into climate change, through buying into what is really Malthusianism, we actually believe the world has too many people. And basically we need to control population down to a de minimis standard so we can control the population. That's been the strategy. And that's what's happening in Europe. And it always leads to what Europe is now doing, which is, okay, this thing is out of control. So now we're going to go full up totalitarianism, fascism with a democratic face. So they're censoring the population. They're throwing people in prison for thought crimes, i.e. if I, express hatred towards what's happening in an irrational way or in a rational way, I'm going to jail. That's what's going on in Europe. So I don't think, you got to go back and actually look at this philosophical foundation for this stuff and understand how deeply evil this whole open society framework is. It was started by Karl Popper, who is Soros's mentor. And Karl Popper hated Plato. He hated the foundations of the American Republic. He was a complete Aristotelian. And you see where that philosophy actually goes. So Mike may have something additional to say about that.
Just a brief, people have heard it, the North American Union. The EU is the exemplary of how the British Empire wanted to reorganize the world after World War II. It is totally British. It is total takeover. It is spreading Londonistan, kind of the agenda of undermining the culture of Europe and its civilization, what the Trump administration called a civilizational erasure. They wanted to organize the entire world around these kinds of regions, basically centralized around a bureaucracy and a major central bank. And what Trump is challenging is that entire structure. He's going back to sovereign nation states, and that is the fight.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan, and thank you, Fender, for joining us every week.
You keep calling Mike Susan. It's just not automatic.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mike. I
know you're giving me a complex, dude. I thought you were just saying earlier you were totally against this kind of thing.
Oh, my live show autopilot's totally on full pilot here. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for laughing along with me. Okay, I have a bunch more. We're gonna get through here some more. I watch your channel on Tosi TV every day. I like Tosi a lot too. Scott Ritter and McGregor lie, period. They have their own agenda and live in a parallel universe. Yeah, you know, even in our organization, we were kind of following McGregor for a little while, maybe like a year ago, when he was maybe saying some things that were a little bit more sane. You know who else has completely gotten crazy is Tucker Carlson, right? So a lot of these people on the internet are just getting completely misled. Barbara, what are your thoughts on this? Because we're seeing this happen to more than just Scott Ritter and McGregor here. This is like a wider problem of people really going off script.
Well, I mean, first of all, people are, as Mike said, people are living in a prior period of history. You know, they're fighting the Iraq war over again in terms of you know, what's going on. As Vice President Vance said yesterday, the difference between this and the forever wars is the forever wars were conducted under a stupid president. We don't have a stupid president right now, you know, and this is not a forever war. So, you know, they made their claim to fame fighting the last war. Just think about it. Their identities are rooted in this prior period, and they can't get out of it. That's giving them the benefit of the doubt. All right. I agree with what's going on in the chat, actually saying these people are clearly being deployed against the MAGA movement, whether they actually are conscious of it or not. I always say, just take a look at what both Ritter and McGregor said about the Ukraine war. Remember, they were predicting day in, day out, and I even fell for it. You know, Russia's just going to come in and destroy things, and the war will be over in 2 weeks. All right, didn't happen. So when they repeat that over and over and over again, you got to ask yourself, what's wrong with their mental framework that they can't adjust their analysis to actually meet what the current evidence actually kind of indicates. And I would add a caveat. In warfare, which is what's going on right now, you can come up with an impression, but you're really not going to know everything that happened because of the fog of war. You know, things are being done by the Trump administration not to lose the element of surprise. The element of surprise really determines whether people get killed or not. So there's a lot of propaganda out there, even from the administration, because essentially they're taking into account, what do my generals need me to say to actually protect the troops? It's a very simple military calculation. But people don't take that into account, all the armchair generals who are out here commenting, you know, my responsibility, if I'm president, first and foremost, is to protect the people of the United States, and in a war, to give the maximum advantage to my military so that as many people as can be avoided don't die. So I think people have to start taking things like that into account.
Yeah, I would just say the one other thing is that a lot of these guys share in common is this libertarian problem. Tucker had it, Doug McGregor has it. There's a kind of sense of what are you fighting for? If you're just trying to stop conflict from ever happening, if you're just trying to remove so everyone can just do whatever they want, that's not a mission. There's no devotion. You're not fighting for anything. You're not making it clear what the perspective is. You're saying we should all just pursue our own, whatever we want. No conflict is somehow peace. It's just not going to work. In that vacuum, the enemy will eat you alive. And I think the enemy is eating these people alive. They're turning some of them. They're confusing some of them because they don't have a clear sense of the mission. And if you like Promethean, I think you like it because we have a clear sense of the mission. We make our assessments based on that.
Thank you, Mike. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a lot of the reason why people like us. And we have a very deeply rooted historical tradition in our analysis. I think that's another angle that we bring to the table, that I watch tons of hours, an incredible amount of YouTube every day. I look at the other channels. That's one of the unique things we bring. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and Hawk, thank you, Hawk fan 5153. I think she's expressing what I was just saying. I didn't know any of this stuff. Why did I not get this in school? Thanks anyway. I'm wondering what the Imperials' next move will be. One of the reasons why you didn't get some of this in school is because the organization that Promethean Action kind of grew out of did a lot of super unique, original historical research, some of which is becoming now more widely accepted. But still, a lot of what we talk about, you have to really go and do a little bit of digging, or you have to go look at out-of-print books to really find resources for what we're talking about. But generally, guys, what do you think the next move of the imperialists might be?
I don't have a guess on that. Barbara, do you?
No, I mean, I think they're trying to reorganize something here. There's a meeting at Chatham House today where they're talking about trade, where Canada is really kissing up to the EU, wants to join it. They're going to try and form a trading bloc to actually exert pressure on the United States. But other than that, you know, if you remove the Middle East chessboard, the game that's been played in the Middle East, which clearly is Trump's objective here, and the Ukraine war, they're pretty much screwed with their own populations. We're looking at the upcoming election in Hungary, where they're doing everything possible to rig it against Viktor Orban. And, you know, if they do that, I think it's going to throw Europe into real chaos. But that's just looking ahead a little bit. And anything I'd have to say would be kind of speculative at this point. I think they're screwed if we actually succeed in the present situation. And if we actually end the war in Ukraine, they don't have a lot of moves on the chessboard.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that we're forcing them to react. I think Trump is forcing them into constant reaction.
Yeah.
The question is, what is our next move? Let me just say, there's a lot of things in the chat. What's the mission? What's the mission? Well, in some sense, it's what we're saying. A system of sovereign nation states in the world premised on the American economic miracle, that we revive our own economic greatness. We revive the American system of political economy, which gives self-governing people a chance to rapidly develop, to build up their countries, to build up their civilizations. We make that available for the first time to nations all over the world. That's what we're fighting for. That's what the American mission has been since the end of World War II. That's the world we've made possible. And it's what Trump has brought back to life, because if the United States isn't going to lead it, no other nation is. But if we do, other nations are going to rapidly adopt it. And that's what you see. That's what you see happening in the Middle East today.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Hawks fan, for joining us. If you like what we've been saying, please get our free newsletter. Our free newsletter, we're going to send you something every day. I am still working towards the digest version. I'm working on building out the infrastructure so that it's easier for me to do. But right now we're sending an email every day. Get on our free email list. It's the best way for us to stay in contact with you. Okay, I'm going to take this next two together. So thank you, Jace Ace. The Navy destroyer HMS Dragon is fitted with a tactical nuke. Well, unless you have some inside information, we're going to have to take your word for it. But then this person comes up again, Jace Ace. And I think this is something that we get all the time. So I always think it's important to address this overall sentiment. All right. Why doesn't Donald Trump just put daylight on Prince Charles, mention all the corruption on live news, and everything's going to be okay? This is something. Why doesn't Trump just put these people on trial? Why doesn't Trump just go on, television and put the daylight on Prince Charles and mention all this corruption?
I think one of Trump's most cunning factors is that he doesn't talk out loud about what he's actually planning on doing. But Barbara, what do you think?
I agree. You can basically go up to somebody and punch them in the face, and you may or may not succeed in destabilizing them by doing that. Mostly you won't. You invite a punch in the face right back. What Trump is doing is he's destroying the entire structure of the modern British Empire. He's gone after the green stuff, which is the ideology which has shaped everything that they've done and shaped an entire world of finance under the Biden administration. Think about it. Nobody under Biden and their framework could get a loan to drill oil at all. Nobody under that framework could actually develop nuclear power at all. The only money or credit that was going out in the world was supposed to go to windmills and solar. And, that was it. That was the energy source for that economy. He's chosen to basically go right after every single major policy they have and make the population inoculated to it for what it is. So documenting Prince Charles's holdings, his involvement in the World Economic Forum, which he was a key part of, how the Commonwealth countries actually work, how much money he personally holds and the Windsor family personally holds. You can do that exercise, but it's not really going to tell you, how to defeat it in the population, because people get stuck on looking at the nouns, i.e. the description, rather than the verbs. What are they doing? What are they doing? How do I actually box them in and, stop them from doing what they're doing?
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Jace Ace, for the questions. Please make sure you get our free newsletter or subscribe to our YouTube channel here. The link is in the description. Paola, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for the super chat. Wendy, thank you for all your work. Thank you for joining us. Like I said, we can't do any of this without your support. So please subscribe to the channel, share our videos everywhere. We got a question, right? We got a question last week. We're not even officially on TikTok or Telegram. So, okay, actually, I think this is a good point for me to mention this. We are not officially on TikTok, and we especially are not officially on Telegram. I know more about Telegram than I'd like to admit. We are not officially on that platform. And I know people are copying our likenesses alongside rather questionable content. I've seen some of it myself. We reported it. Unfortunately, on the Telegram platform and on TikTok, there's only so much we can do, right? We can report a channel, but you report one and 50 million others just turn up. So please, everyone, continue to share our content, right? What I'm trying to tell you is we're reaching so many people because others are literally taking our content and sharing it everywhere. So thank you very much, Wendy, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for the support. And just a reminder, we are not officially on Telegram, and we are not officially on TikTok. Somebody sent in an email question saying, hey, I'm so happy I ran into your content on TikTok. Right? And I'm absolutely amazed. We're not even officially on TikTok, yet people are recruiting for us just by reposting. So thank you, everyone, for everything you've done for this movement. We have more in store for everyone. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Bridget, for the super chat. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Click the bell icon so you can get notifications when we post our next video. All right, and I'm going to come back to Paola. Thank you very much for the super chat, and I'm going to roll this question in now with two questions from, actually, let's start with this one. I'm going to take your question here because we get so many questions on the same topic here. Let me put this one up. Okay. So I'm going to first read the one from Paola down here. Do you believe Trump is in favor of the Greater Israel Plan, and will he allow the incursion of Israel into Lebanon? The Christians of Lebanon are caught in a proxy war quagmire between Hezbollah and Israel. Okay. And then I have a question. I want to get this other person's name in here. And this is from Rania. Hello, your account is my go-to on X when I want to relieve some anxiety. I really appreciate your work at Promethean Action is doing. Love you all, especially Barbara. You have a fan, Barbara. You have tons of fans. I had a question regarding Lebanon and its desire for freedom from Iran's proxy Hezbollah. Is there anything you could share about how that situation might evolve? Do you think Israel could be successful in weakening or dismantling Hezbollah in a way that ultimately gives the country back to the Lebanese people? Thank you for all the insights you share. And thank you for your question.
Complicated question. Lebanon is really one of the, nations in this area that has a long history as a nation. A lot of the other nations, so-called countries, weren't nations at all before the Psyop Treaty. So there isn't a long cultural tradition. So the answer to that is that Hezbollah, obviously Israel is doing a major offensive in southern Lebanon. I don't think it's part of any greater Israel plan. I think it's part and parcel of stopping the missile attacks from Hezbollah. If you actually look at a map and you look at the relationship between Lebanon and Israel, and you think about it, that entire bottom area of Israel next to Lebanon has been evacuated of Israeli citizens for a significant amount of time now because of those missile attacks. It was not safe for people to actually live there. So do I agree with every tactic that Israel takes? I really am troubled by a lot of them. But, the point is that what they're doing is they're doing it on behalf of their right to exist. They're very angry. They've existed in this dynamic for a long time. As Trump said regarding the strikes, because of Israel's anger about what has happened in the Middle East. You're dealing with a situation in which rage on both sides becomes a determinant of strategic policy absent and outside intervention. My friend Lyndon LaRouche once said towards the end of his life that he didn't see a way of actually creating peace in the Middle East because of these ancient hatreds without a massive outside intervention from nations like Russia, China, and the United States. That if you try to do it between the combatants themselves, you always get this out of control kind of military situation caused again by ancient manipulations and hatreds. Trump's, Boulos, who is in the Trump family, he's Tiffany, Trump's father-in-law, is trying very hard to negotiate a peace in Lebanon on behalf of the administration. Rick Grinnell and others have also played a significant role in that. And I'm personally hoping that Grinnell leaving the Kennedy Center means he's going to be working both in Michigan with the Lebanese and other communities there, and also on this Lebanon situation, in particular, trying to bring about a peace. So that's the answer. People mischaracterize all the time because of the devastation created by Israeli tactics. They long ago decided, after trying to take Gaza and give it over to Hamas. Think about that. They withdrew. They said, okay, you guys do it. And you actually create that space and you develop it. What happened? October 7th. Why did it happen? Well, it happened in part because of the Abraham Accords. It happened in part because Trump had actually brought together a situation in which there could have been an overall peace deal, even back during the I hate to use the word retarded because I know a lot of people will say that, but that is what was going on in the Biden administration. There could have been the development of an actual recognition of Israel by the Saudis, and that was on the way to happen before October 7th happened. So this is an area where proxy wars, in history have gone on and on and on and on. And I just think that you've got to take that into account in looking at how the overall situation exists, and not really. You have to stand back and look at it very coldly and try very hard not to get emotionally involved in it. I get emotionally involved in it all the time, and I have to constantly kick myself in the rear end and say, no, go back and look at the situation from an Israeli standpoint, then look at the situation from a Palestinian standpoint, then think about how do you solve it. And that's the difficulty. You have to be dispassionate in something which excites the passions, to say the least.
Thank you, Barbara. I want to stick on this Lebanon thing because we actually have two more questions that express a much different side, that suggests that Trump maybe supports this. Do you think the Trump administration anticipated that Israel would invade Lebanon? Thank you, Forrest. And this next one here. Why is Israel trying to annex Lebanon? Isn't Lebanon home to Hezbollah or Hamas? Of course, Israel helped develop Hamas. So is another Palestinian takeover type event on the horizon for Lebanon?
Okay, I guess I'll take it on this one. I just don't think it's worth, there's different factors to what Israel's policy is and Israel's intentions are. But the question is, what is Trump's agenda? Because that's what we're here to mobilize around. Israel has an outlook on its national security, and it's got Hezbollah on one side, Hamas on the other, it's got Iran. It's an environment that was created as a cockpit of war. So it was developed with Israel kind of in there, with radical Islam in there, and to create a perpetual state of war. That's how the British, that's how the globalists have designed this region. So for a nation in that region to be constantly at war, constantly in an aggressive posture, isn't shocking if that's just where I think the Israelis find themselves. The question is, as Barbara said, how do we, as a power outside this region, change the dynamic? And I think you have to start with what Trump did in Syria, somewhat shocking. He didn't launch the massive attack on the Assad family or, Bashar Assad. Certainly Obama and Hillary used ISIS and Al-Qaeda to wage that Syrian civil war. And I'm not defending either Assad in this case. I'm just saying that was US policy at the time. Eventually now we saw over the last couple of years, Turkey has intervened. A faction there, former terrorist network, came in and actually took over Syria. And Trump said, well, let's evaluate this. Can this work? Similar to what he did in Venezuela. Can Delcy Rodriguez work? Can they hold this thing together? It's a tough region. You're gonna have to be a tough guy to handle this and have a crew of people around you to handle it. So he stabilized it. I think Trump wants to do the same thing in Lebanon, which has been targeted as a drug deployment center for the narcotics trade into Europe and other terrorist elements and globalist operations going back to the 80s. He wants to see these places become thriving nations. That's what the Abraham Accords is based on. He wants to see the same thing for Egypt and Jordan as he does for the Gulf countries. And so I think that's the perspective Trump is attempting to implement. And he knows that there is a faction in Israel that wants to use every justification. The Druze in southern Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, our constant national security to push for more and more of a greater security boundary around Israel. But that doesn't ultimately work. That's only going to create more and more conflict. You've got to create a condition for nation states to start thriving. I think the US and Russia collaboration is going to be key. They're going to put pressure on Turkey, on Egypt, on these other nations involved. That's why we've got to get Iran figured out. So you can put pressure on this region to calm down, start developing. That's what Kushner and Witkoff did on the Gaza reconstruction plan. That's what the whole program is. There's a number of right-wing elements in Israel that are furious over this reconstruction plan, but Trump is committed. We're going to build up the region. We're going to build up these nations, and we're going to have a prolonged and sustained effort to get there. And so we take away the justification for this kind of condition of permanent war, because that's what we want. We want a stable region that can develop, not the threat of constant permanent war. That's why they want to get out of the Middle East. And Trump wants to leave it with a certain architecture that's premised on this idea. That's why I said the mission here is to get a system of nation states that are applying American system economic methods for development. And Trump doesn't care what your regime is or where you come from. Are you willing to work with us on that and commit to that? And that's what we've got to figure out in Lebanon. I think Lebanon wants that. I think they want to get rid of Hezbollah. They don't want this kind of proxy army. They want to abide by what Trump has laid out in the Abraham Accords. And I think that's what I'm fighting for. I think that's what Trump's fighting for in the Middle East. And I think that's the only coherent perspective long term.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm going to come back to domestic issues in just a moment. So I saw people in the chat earlier were mentioning my T-shirt. So as you know, I have released 3 T-shirt designs. The George Washington one is a little bit smaller. Here's the Benjamin Franklin and the Alexander Hamilton shirts. I'm going to drop a link right now if you want to get your own. Unfortunately, for some reason, YouTube is not letting me pin my Alexander Hamiltons. It's only letting me pin the Ben Franklin one. So if you just go to the link that I've pinned in the YouTube video, I'll pin it in the chat too. But if you're interested in getting this shirt, there's also a link in the description. It's called the America 250 collection. And I also have a George Washington one. I have cups. I'm thinking about doing some other merch. I'll be releasing it as we get closer to the 4th of July. So if anyone's interested in these T-shirts, the Alexander Hamilton, I have a Ben Franklin one, and I have a George Washington one. It's a little bit smaller. You can check the link. I've pinned it. The link's also in the description for the America 250 collection. And also the premium one is an extra vibrant print. I have a regular version and a premium one. It's $10 more. The premium one, it has a print that's extra strong. These are really nice prints. Okay. And now I'm just going to move quickly here to a question on domestic issues. Let's see here, number 20. Do you think that if MAGA or the Republican Party is being purposefully fractured, that the reorganizing of the right and the left together against Israel first and the pedophile class would just foil their plans and make us all stronger, both as a country and a worldwide movement towards peace, harmony, and healthy families? Thank you. Thank you, Dee, for the question. And let me see. I'll read this one together here. What do you make of the large number of Republican representatives who are not running for re-election? Do you worry about this making it more difficult to hold and increase our majority in both the House and Senate? Or do you believe this is a purposeful ploy to destroy our majorities in both houses? Thank you. The first one here asks if the Republican Party is being purposefully fractured, and would a reorganizing in the left and right be something good? And the second one, do you think that a large number of Republican parties who are not running for re-election, do you think this is an attack against the MAGA part of the Republican Party? Mike and Barbara.
Well, I'll take the first one, and the answer to that is yes. They're trying as hard as they can to fracture the Republican Party ahead of the midterms, and the consequences of that you've got to keep very clear, and people have to stop thinking about many of the predicates of the operation. If we don't succeed in having a dramatic victory in November in the midterm elections, a difficult task, because we've got to put Trump on the ballot. The Democrats are sort of doing that, but we've got to put Trump on the ballot, and you're going to have to hold your nose in many cases and vote Republican. Why should you do that? Well, because if we pull this out and get a massive victory, then basically people are beholden to us and to Trump. Politicians become much more beholden to Donald Trump, the president, and to the people who actually won their elections for them. So I think we have to be very clear-headed about what the fracturing is about. In my view, and as I said in my video yesterday, I think the fracturing is about an imposed religious warfare perspective, which is basically designed to drive people into various camps, anti-Muslim or, anti-Israel. Think about that. Just step back from the emotion of it for a second and think about that clash. That's the Middle East. That's the Middle East now coming here, all right, to a coalition which won in November because it was an interfaith coalition. Think about MAGA prior to all of this stuff emerging about Epstein, which had, a lot of things which I don't want to discuss today because it's a whole other topic. But you had first the Epstein stuff, handled very poorly by Pam Bondi initially, which set off an operation. It's not like I think she did that deliberately. I think she wasn't on top of the situation and not realizing the volatility of the issue was really bad. But, that set off a whole thing on the internet, which consumed people in a really big way. So there's that dynamic. Now we're into the war situation. Where do you stand? Do you stand with Israel or do you stand with the Muslims? Okay, that's how the whole thing is being reduced. And it's a false picture. And people are getting extremely emotional about it. And, if you think about it, in Michigan, Mike can tell you about this, the Muslim vote was the key to winning Michigan in 2024. Lebanon right now is creating a kind of real mess in that, and the war in the Middle East is creating a real mess in that, because people are saying, what is this whole operation against the Muslims going on, where we're out, whole sections of the party are out there campaigning against Sharia law when 1% of the population is Muslims. They're not going to take over the United States. All right. But you think about the wildness of that particular situation, and Dearborn has been a very stable and wonderful community up to this point in time. So it's manufactured. And, it's driving or attempting to drive a split in the MAGA movement. It's not working. That's the other thing which you have to recognize. It's not working. I mean, there was a poll by CNN on Monday or Tuesday, which actually showed that support in the MAGA movement for Donald Trump, 100%. Support for the war, 90% of MAGA. But, here's the big but, you can't dominate in the midterms the way we have to dominate if this flakes off the independents and the former Democrats who were part and parcel of the Donald Trump victory in November of 2024. And that's the task which all of us have to be very, very clear-headed about. And we have to go out and actually organize and get people out of this religious warfare framework taking place all over the internet at this point. That brings up Joe Kent. People are asking about it in the chat. I just want to say a few words about that. I don't know what's actually happening with this guy for real. You know, everybody's putting out various things about it. But here's what I'd say. A lot of people on the internet have actually constructed his past statements where, you know, over and over and over again, he's talking about Iran as a major threat. Iran is a major threat. We've got to take them out. Okay. Then we basically have this Damascus Road conversion to, you know, Iran is not a threat. There was no imminent threat. And people are being suppressed in the administration because of the Israel lobby. Well, that line is exactly the line I'm talking about in terms of what's all over the internet, what the Democrats are pushing, what the British are pushing, what, you know, everybody is using to try and defeat Donald Trump. That's the line of battle. Now, why did he flip? Well, if he is under FBI investigation for leaking, which seems to be the case, and he leaked stuff which was classified information, and it's said by leaks from the administration that he was told he was under investigation prior to his resignation. Well, if I did it and I'm Joe Kent, I'm fried at that point. So I got to figure out my defense. What's my defense going to be if I'm actually charged? They're doing this to me because I was a dissident in the Trump administration. And that's some lawyer is already involved. I can tell you that right now. And they're thinking about what would sell to a DC jury if he's charged. And that's exactly what's going on here, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you very much for that. I think I'm going to move right to the next question because I think is the direct question of the midterms. And we get so many questions like this. Thank you, Wolfgang, for the very simple question. We're going to discuss that for just a minute here. How does a willing, God-fearing patriot join the fight to clean local cities and counties?
Okay, yeah, I'll take that. So, Wolfgang, and for anybody else out there, we've been doing a series of Zoom calls on Friday nights. They've been every other week. This week we're doing it consecutively, so it's going to be again this Friday. You can sign up at PrometheanPAC.com, PrometheanPAC.com. Go to Bootcamp Resources. You can sign up for the bootcamp there. You can see it up on the top right, Midterm Bootcamp. You can sign up. You'll get Zoom notifications. You'll be able to join the live discussion. And what we're building is a whole different level of political organization, because as someone asked in the earlier question, are we, there's like 40 members of Republicans in Congress and only 20 Democrats who are retiring. So that's twice the number of Republicans. Is this a bad thing? Is this threatening the midterm? That may be part of the plan for some of them. I mean, and certainly in some cases like McConnell, good riddance, probably good riddance to most of them if we know the nature of Republicans in Congress. The question is, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to be able to educate the candidates, the ones that are running? Because we can get a new class of freshman Republicans in office that are going to shape themselves around what Promethean's saying, what Trump has been doing these last 10 years, and back up his administration. And so our sense is that that's what we want to do. We want to discuss the midterm boot camp in a way that gives you a chance to figure out how you can be active, how you can take responsibility in your local level. We're also setting up a social media platform called Circle. This will allow people in different states and areas to be able to talk and network with one another and build up kind of Promethean-like discussions of how to target your state, how to target certain campaigns, certain candidates, make sure we get to their rallies, to their events, talk to the candidates, get them the material, share the material. And build up a kind of increasing movement on the ground that elevates the discussion, because at core here, the enemy's attempt is to distract us, to put us into factions, to put us into categories, to put us in opposition to one another. You're a Protestant, you're a Catholic, you're a Jew, you're a Muslim. And the question here is, are we going to advance? Is our cause going to advance? The reason they want to distract us, the reason they want to break us up, the reason they want to create permanent conflict in the Middle East is to prevent the very economic development Trump is trying to bring to bear, both here and there and in Venezuela or anywhere. Because why? Because when you have real economic development, you have real prosperity. That's why Trump pulled off a masterstroke. We've got $40 trillion in debt. Nobody else could have done this. Nobody in America besides Donald Trump. $40 trillion in debt, massive corporate debt, massive household debt. And Trump figures out a way to get these companies and countries who are dependent on the US market to invest up to $18 trillion into major infrastructure, manufacturing, industry, energy, and so on. That kind of shift, that's the American system. That was Alexander Hamilton entirely. And that's the kind of perspective people have to have going into the midterm. Because all this Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes kind of constant, it's like Oprah and Alex Jones had a baby and you got Candace Owens. It's just constant distraction. And the question is, are we going to focus on what we need to focus on, which is what most Americans want to know? Are we going to build our way out of this economic and cultural pit? I don't want to be black-pilled. I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm trying to raise my children, my grandchildren. Is there going to be a viable future? For the first time in my lifetime, Trump has introduced that full force over the last year. Yes, he's cleaning up some foreign problems like Iran, like Venezuela. We've got to deal with Ukraine and Europe. But we are going to clean these up with the sense that there is a trajectory of real development in the United States. And for whatever reason, whether it's their religious perspectives or their influences or Joe Kent leaking, I mean, God knows people have all kinds of problems. People have not prepared for this kind of political war. They're not prepared for it. And I think they're caught off guard and they're basically swimming in deep waters and they're treading and they're basically coming up with whatever they can because there's not a clear strategic focus. What do we got to do to make sure we beat the enemy? You've got to create economic advancement. Once you do that, all these more evil, satanic ideologies start to be pushed aside and the more beautiful elements of all of their various cultures start to come up. Because once start people feeling prosperous, they're not indulging in all this wickedness any longer. But that's why our focus is what it is. That's why Trump is doing what he's doing, because he sees the same thing. You create that prosperity, you create that economic development. That is the American system. That's how we held the Union together. Lincoln built the Transcontinental Railroad while we were basically in the Civil War because he knew these wounds aren't going to just heal themselves. You've got to plunge the nation with a real mission to develop, to advance for the whole country. So I think that's the best perspective. That's how we outflank any enemy operation, and we take that message. So if you haven't signed up for the boot camp, we get about 200 people on. Why don't we try to double it, get 400 people on this Friday, sign up, engage, bring your thoughts, bring your questions, and help build this Promethean community. So that would be my response.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I want to highlight this question here because I think this is an excellent entry point. Thank you, Lightbulb, for making this comment. I think this is very insightful. If I only had Barbara's brain, okay, the way that you get this level of understanding and confidence, the only way to do it, and all three of us have been through this process, you need to actually take your ideas that you have and try to talk to other people about them. Until you try to actively communicate your ideas that you have to other people, you're not going to feel confident in them. You're not going to feel confident in your own ability and your own ideas. So I'd say the best way, and you can have the understanding we do. I think the best way to get it, it's the way I started in political action. It's the way Mike started and Barbara started. We all started trying to organize other people for real change. And one of the big problems that we see as an organization is that so many people are caught up in the consumptive cycle. I know, I watch I consume a lot of content. Everyone consumes tons of content. But even though I consume a lot of content, I consume a lot of content with the idea of informing what I'm going to do in response, what I'm going to do on this show, or what I'm going to do producing the shows for the YouTube channel. So I think that's the key thing, is getting out of the consumptive mindset and into a productive mindset, into a mindset where you're actually trying to convey these ideas to other people. It's really the most important thing. So maybe Barbara can say a few things on on our what we're trying to do with the midterm boot camp. We're trying to do is we're trying to build up people that can take competent political action at every layer across the United States.
Yeah, well, what we're trying to do, and this is Promethean PAC, which is our political action committee, and I'm the treasurer of that wonderful entity. And essentially, what we're trying to do is mass educate the entire population at this point on what the president is actually doing. All right, the White House does that; they do a good job, but people don't tune into it. We cover it. The president does that. But, all the people who used to amplify, and this is critical to understanding part of the psychological warfare operation I'm talking about, all of the social media people who used to amplify what the president was doing or what was happening to him, now are, off on their own toots in many respects. Tucker Carlson was a key person in all of that. If you think about his role in exposing the enemy operations against Donald Trump. He's gotten destabilized and is obviously acting like a coward at this point. A lot of other people have essentially abandoned ship. And then you turn to Fox. Well, that's a British operation designed to essentially get you really traumatized and, your head screwed on backwards, because what do I got? I got crazy Lindsey Graham talking all the time about war and how much he loves Trump. I got, General Keane and all the people from the Iraq war parading themselves. I got Ted Cruz. I got all of these people essentially pushing a certain line, which reinforces this religious warfare operation, because in fact, these people are Z-lobby people. All right. And that happens to be true. But that doesn't mean that's the actual dynamic we should be paying attention to. So what we're doing is we're focused on economics, on the American system of economics, a revolution just like the one that built our country starting 250 years ago, that people haven't been educated on at all. And you can learn that. All right, you can read Hamilton. We have all sorts of things on our website, historical things by Bob Ingram, Brian Lance, and others, which will take you through this. And you can become as adroit at it as I am. And I kid you not. Because if you actually take to heart these concepts and the difference between physical economy, Elon Musk likes to say it's a little bit like physics. Either an economy works physically or it doesn't. You're either obeying the laws of nature or you're running up against the laws of nature. And that's a pretty simple concept for something that's very simple. But, everybody has been educated that the economy is like a gambling casino. You hear the bells going off all the time. I grew up around Las Vegas, so I'm fairly familiar with gambling casinos. And I always think about what I always heard in gambling casinos. You walk in and you hear everybody else winning. So you decide, oh, I'm going to put some money down. And of course you lose. But that's sort of what I hear all the time with ding, 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 the Wall Street bells. It's the same thing. So this is the educational task that Mike's talking about. The mission, Trump is doing it. He's doing the American system, but people don't understand that. And the American system historically has been completely opposed by the British system. They've tried to destroy it. That's why you don't hear about it in school. All right. And that's something that's really critical for people to understand. So it's a matter of passion. It's a matter of saying, I want to save this country. And to do so, I got to educate myself. And that's what Promethean PAC is doing through the midterm boot camp. And that's what we're doing from a policy standpoint with Promethean Action. And that's our whole mission here, is to get people up to snuff to fight the battle we have to fight right now, which is a battle really of ideas and how ideas are realized in the real world.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please make sure you drop us a like if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on x.com, you can share the video. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a question here that's on the state of Kentucky, which is becoming a big battleground right now. Thanks for helping us sleep better at night despite all the black-pilled media hysteria. In Kentucky, can you shed some light on the rift between Massey, Paul, Gowron, and Trump for midterm sanity in voting? The dynamic is confusing. Yes, it is very confusing, to say the least. Barbara and Mike, what are your thoughts on Kentucky dynamic? And then I thought, really quick, I thought it was interesting that Trump did an interview with the YouTuber Logan Paul, who's also from Kentucky.
Jake Paul.
That was a multi-hour interview. I thought also that adds another angle to the whole Kentucky thing.
Mike, you want to start with that?
Well, I guess I could say a few things. I mean, I think we all know that Rand Paul and Thomas Massey have not been backing President Trump. And the bigger question is why? A big part of it is that Trump's revival of the American system doesn't fly with their kind of adherence to a libertarian outlook. And the whole point of the American system is it is not ideological. Trump is a pragmatist. He's a practical guy. He looks to what works. And what he has seen by his study of history is that every time we apply the aspects of the American system, we build our country, we advance. The nation grows, it expands, the American empire gets stronger, more industrial, we're colonizing space, we're advancing new technologies, we're building energy supply, and the rest of the world benefits from that kind of growth. And every time we go to another approach, it doesn't work. So Trump brought in an agenda like tariffs, and people like Rand Paul and Massey said, well, you can't do tariffs. That's the government intervening into the global marketplace. The global marketplace controlled by whom? The World Trade Organization, a bunch of bankers and lawyers in Geneva, a bunch of kind of multinational, transnational corporations that are now dictating the terms of trade and economic development to the United States. So there's just a complete philosophical and political divide there. Now, I think there's probably other elements in terms of Massey. You see this with the people that have really just decided to basically cash in on an anti-Trump position. Once Massey found himself probably outside. But I think the bigger question, he lumps Massey in with Rand Paul. Trump won Kentucky. Trump recognized that the places like Appalachia, like John Kennedy did, like Franklin Roosevelt did, like Abraham Lincoln recognized, that you've got to build up these areas of our country. You've got to build up the areas that are working poor, that have the industry, the manufacturing, the investments. We've got to create that. Not more financial bubbles on Wall Street, not more bailouts from the Fed, investments into the infrastructure and industry and production of places like Kentucky. And so Trump wins Kentucky by like 40 points because he has that kind of commitment. And I think that's the clarity. Now, whether the other candidate running against Massey represents all of that, I don't know. The point is that Donald Trump is the one leading this kind of political army, and that creates clarity to the perspective. I think the most important thing Americans need to do is get a sense of what this American system how it really functions. And we do have a lot of material on our website. You can get that. But it goes back even before Hamilton. It goes back to the original Pilgrim and Puritan colonies in Massachusetts. We built a civilization out of a wilderness, and we built up institutions and methods that no other aspect of civilization ever came to really understand. And that's called the American system of economics. So the more we understand that, the less likely we're going to fall prey to the kind of political manipulations and factions that the enemy is trying to put on us.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, Barbara. We're going to keep going here with the issue of domestic issues here. Let's go to question number 18. Okay, let me take this one down. All right, please talk about the tariffs. We are experiencing doubling prices on many items, and the proprietors say it's because of the tariffs. The pain is real, and I fear it will cost us the midterms. I personally feel it will correct itself in a very positive way, but many are losing faith. Thank you very much. When I get rid of this comment here, the software is not being happy. All right, there we go. Now take this one away. Okay, thank you, Laura. So some people are still seeing tariff experiencing doubling prices. What's the issue on tariffs here?
Well, I think she's basically talking about the answer where she says it will correct itself in a very positive way, but many are losing faith. You got to understand the difference between short-term and long-term survival of the country. All right, we're rebuilding the country. We had an economy which actually sucked terribly, and we had an inflation inherited from Biden, which was overwhelming. That's being cut down, and it's being cut down in part because of tariffs. In part, as Mike said, because the trillions of dollars of investment which are flowing in through the tariffs are cutting into the deficit and cutting into other things. So you've got to think about, where are the prices going up? Well, if you're Walmart or you're the dollar store, you're mostly importing stuff from China. All right. And China isn't necessarily being terribly cooperative on saying, I want the United States to prosper under a tariff regime, because it's not in their interest to do so. All right. So you got to explain to people how that a cup of coffee that you're drinking right now is a worldwide cup of coffee, and things that happen in China and India and every place else impact that. That's the chessboard on which we're actually playing here. And overall, what's happening is that industry, manufacturing is coming back to the United States. We are investing in the future economy that isn't based on oil or the oil speculative economy, which was actually launched in 1971 and favored London. We're now transitioning to an American system of economy where fusion power and nuclear power are going to be the key energy sources in the economy, which, if you think about it, is pretty hard to speculate about, because it's something that the mind creates rather than being in a geographic location of resource depletion, which is what's going on with oil and why you see the speculation around that. Many, many, many smaller businesses have been hit. That's true. And, the administration is doing a lot. They're very conscious of this. It's not like they don't see it. They're doing everything in their power right now to bring prices down. You're going to see some activities, I believe, Besant was predicting it, to bring the price of fuel down. You bring that down, and it goes through the entire rest of the economy, which is why an oil shock is such a big deal, because of the follow-on effects in the overall economy. You see, J.D. Vance was just in Michigan yesterday, laying out, the rebirth of manufacturing. Are the British fighting that? You bet. Canada is fighting that like crazy in terms of the automobile industry. So there are all of these pitched battles going on, which don't necessarily have to do specifically with tariffs. They have to do with the opposition by the financial community to what Trump has actually launched here, which means their economy, the speculative economy, is being completely de-emphasized. And credit, which is actually critical to creating an economy, is being diversified. It's not Scott Bessent is doing everything in his power to create the basis for community banks to actually function. There's a story that's told about the Chinese Industrial Revolution. They went to Japan and actually asked them, in the dawn of the modern period, how come Japan has this manufacturing and industrial economy that works? Why don't you tell me what that's about? And they said, well, how many banks does China have? One. Well, that's not going to work. You got to actually have a diversified credit system and the ability for people to get credit for major economic development if you're going to actually have an industrial and modern manufacturing economy where, by the way, people actually get enough pay to, override inflation. So that's all in motion by the administration. We've just got to make sure that people understand it. And Mike may have something to add.
I mean, I just don't. I mean, maybe Laura should say more in the chat. I just don't see the doubling in prices, but I think that Trump's doing a number of things. He's trying to move on housing right now. I think the big thing right now is the Save America Act. I think that's where the pressure's got to come down. I think people know we've got to get a coherent government. I mean, the prices of oil are up. Other things like that are going up because of this conflict. But I think we've got to keep moving the nation forward. I think people see it. It's been so long since we've had a coherent, positive growth that people are jumpy. They're yipping. They're panicking. They're getting anxious. And I think we've got to focus on what we're going to build.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Barbara. Let's go into some more economics now. First, a quick shout out to Karen. Just ordered my Hamilton tea. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy it. I'm working on some other merch, like maybe socks or something like that. If you're on the email list, you'll get notifications if I do other designs. So thank you very much. Okay, so again, let's continue on this issue of Hamilton. So thank you, Scott Rose, for tuning in. Did Hamilton lay the groundwork for centralized U.S. finance that later aligned with global banking networks, including London? What allowed that system to take root? Well, before Barbara and Mike say anything, what allowed that system to take root was Woodrow Wilson and the Democratic Party. They are the ones that really solidified the Federal Reserve Act, was Woodrow Wilson. So Barbara and Mike can say more about that. And then I'm going to take this other one here because it's also very similar. So thank you, Stephen, for the super chat. How do you have a real prosperity with fake money? And that is also debt at the same time. The American system is based on sound money, quantifiable, honest weights, measures, and money. So where does the American system, where does Hamilton's idea of a central bank, where does that begin to overlap with the modern idea of a central national bank versus central bank? And then what does it mean to have, what does sound money actually mean? Does that mean like it's backed by gold? Is that what you mean by sound money? So Barbara and Mike, what are your thoughts on this national issue of national banking and sound money?
Well, first of all, Hamilton's national bank, and people should spend a little bit of time and actually read it. He wrote a whole treatise to the Congress concerning the national bank and his idea about it. We also have a book by Bob Ingram in our toolbox going through, Hamilton's system and national banking versus central banking. But, what it's a question of intent. What the national bank was intended to do was provide credit for increasing production, real physical production. That's what the National Bank of Hamilton actually did. The central bank, i.e. the Federal Reserve, is all about moving money around, fiat currency, etc., that people get very confused about, with no real intention in the recent period, at least since 1971, to create an ongoing physical economy. And what do I mean by that? It means, how do I answer the question, how do I actually create an economy such that my grandchildren will see a benefit from it in terms of infrastructure, in terms of new energy sources, in terms of discovery and inventions which actually advance humanity? That's the issue posed by Hamilton. It's not the issue which is ever posed by a central bank or Wall Street, which is the difference. Now, when Scott Bessent came into office, he says that Donald Trump pulled him aside and said, Scott, here's my problem. How do we actually create a new system, a new prosperous system, without collapsing Wall Street? Because if we collapse Wall Street and everything goes bonkers, with a major economic crisis and a major economic collapse, that mitigates what we're trying to do here. And it's a heck of a problem, all right, to actually have best in solving. But he's come up with a whole idea about how you do this. One, you get massive outside investment into the United States. Two, you force all the manufacturers who went abroad to come home. Three, you actually create the basis for new energy sources for the overall economy by looking at and developing the economy of the future. You use AI in an appropriate way. That's a whole other topic, which, you know, we could exhaust in a different show. But, you know, you win the race to actually create the modern economy where we're competing right now with China. And it's a very real competition. If they beat us in developing fusion power, if they beat us in actually getting to the moon and mining it, if they beat us in going to Mars, that means they win the technological race. And what we've got to do is we've got to challenge it in such a way that the two of us together can somehow figure out a way to cooperate to create this type of economy for the entire world. So we're in a transition phase. It's a difficult phase, but I think you see the difference between the two systems. And yes, they say, they slander Hamilton all the time and say he was the first central banker. That's not true.
Thank you, Barbara. As you can see here, guys, I pulled up the final version of the second report on the further provision necessary for establishing public credit. So it's interesting in this document that Hamilton was both hypothesizing both the public bank mechanism and the public credit mechanism as a whole. And I think that's really unique. We also had somebody here who wants some guide. Where can we listen to the explanation of the American system? Any particular podcast we would recommend? What other books might we recommend too for somebody who wants to know more? And a lot of this stuff here, like this report, the report on the National Bank, this is all public domain, right? So this is all out there for people to study on their own. But any other resources that we can point people to on this issue of the American system?
Mike, you want to take that?
I mean, I think that Hamilton's reports are key. Bob Ingram has done a lot. If you look at his studies on Lincoln and McKinley, in each of those books, you'll see, because the best way to study economics is by historical demonstration. It's not this jargon monetary theory they've flooded all of our universities with. You look at how did civilizations, societies, nations overcome a problem. And Lincoln and McKinley both did that. And they used different methods. Trump is doing the same thing today. So I think that's probably the best place to start. Because, I mean, Barbara just said it well. The question is understanding. The way I would look at it, the problem is with modern economics, and this is how the central bank is constructed, is it's meant to be divorced from the way you set up your government, your political organization. It's meant to divorce politics and economics. And the whole point of Hamilton, the whole point of the American system was that our economics has to serve the interests of developing and building citizens, to build a civilization out of a wilderness frontier. That's what I mean by American empire. I don't mean colonize. We don't have any colonies, but what I mean is building the United States as it became a continental nation. How did we do that? How do we sustain that? And how do we do it? By preserving the sense of citizenry, of political freedom, not through some type of control and command economy, the way China is set up. China has half its population still living on less than $5 a day. That's not building citizens. That's building a very strong, modern industrial state. It's not building a political system based on the individual and political freedom. We've done that. How did we do it? And that's what Hamilton recognized the nation was responsible for. So Hamilton's reports, and then I think Bob Ingram probably has some of the best case studies for sure.
Thank you. So one of the places, the place that people can go if you want to get more information on the American system. Unfortunately, JS, I don't have a podcast for you right now. That's something we could definitely be working on. But if you come to the Promethean Action website, let me pull it up. If you come to the Promethean Action website, just search for Promethean Action on any search engine. Our site should be the first one that pops up. If you come up here to the top where it says Toolkit, you'll come to a page. These two reports here, what President Trump can do with the American System 2.0, and a police dossier, it's the British who murder presidents. Both one of these free pamphlets here will give you some background, but if you want some more in-depth stuff, we have some books here, including one on William McKinley, who was probably, before Trump, was probably the last real bastion of the American system. We have some stuff here on on Ben Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, Anglo-Dutch Empire, and we have a book here on national banking. All right, so you can find all these books that we would recommend to you if you come to Promethean Action, and again, just look at our toolkit. So I'd say that would be a good place for you to get some idea of what we mean when we say the American system. Get those two pamphlets, that free pamphlets, what President Trump would do with the American system and the police dossier. That'd be a good place to start. So thank you very much. Okay.
Adam,
yes.
We had a question in the chat of someone who says they're trying to give a contribution and they're having trouble with the donation stuff. And is there a way to mail a contribution or call us? If you go to the Promethean Action webpage and you actually go to contact us, it'll give you the mailing address and also give you the phone numbers to call to make a contribution for your area. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. So yes, thank you everyone here. We have plenty more questions. I'm going to take this next one that I think is one that I think about all the time too. Here we go. So thank you, Danny, for this question. What's the benefit to the British elites allowing the out of control immigration when they know it will destroy their own nation's security and identity? And thank you for the work you do to open our eyes on the reality. Thank you very much, Danny, for this question, because I think this resonates in all the countries that have this illegal mass immigration thing that's going on. So Barbara, what is it? What's in it for the elites, really?
This is deliberate, okay? It's not like, oh, we just made a mistake and all these people came in and we had to let them in or what have you. I think I covered it before by actually talking a little bit about George Soros and the actual policy here. The actual policy is to defeat the nation state. In other words, it's actually to not have the nation state be the form of government you actually have. It's to have a degraded culture. There's a guy by Richard Poe who actually wrote a very interesting book called Why the British Invented Communism and Blamed the Jews. All right. And what he talks about there is really pretty interesting because it has been the policy of what he calls the Third British Empire to degrade the population down to a level of useful idiots who can't think. And you do that by destroying, any national culture. And national cultures get destroyed, of course, when you have massive immigration where people don't want to assimilate. They want to bring their own culture into the situation, and it destroys the identity of the nation state. So they're out to destroy the present form of what people knew as the government of England or the government of Scotland or the government of Ireland, and to impose on it what this crazy idea of a multicultural, society framework, all governed by the EU or governed by a bunch of bureaucrats sitting on top of it. That's the overall plan here, because, and they've said this many times, if you have a prospering democracy where people actually have a stake, citizens actually have a stake in the progress of the nation, their ability to control things vanishes. It's as simple as that, I think.
Thank you. And I just want to say something that I think this whole issue, thank you, Danny, for the question. I think the issue that you're seeing here with this unchecked globalization, as Barbara was trying to say, this is exactly what globalization was supposed to be. This is the world that was supposed to be after the final defeat of the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union fell, the people believed we're in the post-nation state world. We're in the world of globalization. This is what we're going to bring to the world now that communism has been defeated. And so the elites don't care about the identity of the UK. That much is clear. Their identity is to bring globalization, a world with no borders and one language culture, to the world. So I think that's the reason why in any of the countries that are dealing with this, including in the United States, we literally have people in this country who believe that we should not have borders. That's a George Soros thing that Barbara was talking about. So this is the natural outgrowth of what globalization was supposed to be, for sure. So thank you very much, Danny, for the question. I'm going to head over to this next one here, which is also very good. So this one is from Jeff, another really honest question. Thank you, Jeff. As a fervent Trump supporter, I do differ with him in the deal he appears to want to make regarding the Ukraine war. Putin also wants a deal whereby Russia gets to keep the territory they have taken over, and Ukraine obviously won't agree to that. Trump also wants Europe to take over in defending Ukraine, and it seems Britain is doing so with this missile attack. Can you explain why this is really some grand conspiracy and not simply due to these facts?
Mike, you want to take that? I'm losing my voice here.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure exactly what there is a trap. The trap has been to try to pull the United States into another war in Europe. That's what this is. There was a conference at the end of 2010 where the economist Lyndon LaRouche had said that Gaddafi had just been killed. They found him in a drainage trench somewhere south in Libya, and they shot him dead. And the question was, why did they not give him a trial? Why did they just execute him there right away after they had run this kind of regime change war on him? And LaRouche said that they need a war with Russia. They're desperate for it. They're going to escalate in Syria, and they're going to use that as a destabilizing factor to move more towards a full war with Russia. Now, the question is, why say that at the end of 2010? Well, exactly what he said happened. We backed ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. We then supported a coup in Ukraine. All of the leading neocons, Joe Biden was there, but Victoria Nuland, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, they all backed it. Even when there was an attempt to negotiate and say we'll hold new elections outside Ukraine's constitution, and that was so-called agreed to by Western powers, the next day they overthrew the actual government by force. So there was a full kind of coup. They weren't tolerating even political discussion. And then the first act, one of the basic first acts of the new president, Poroshenko, was to ban the Russian language so that the people in the Donbass, especially in the southeast of Ukraine, who are all major Russian speakers, which had been part of Russia for centuries until the breakup of the Soviet Union, they basically went into civil war. And there was a protracted negotiations to say, can we just resolve this between Russia, France, and Germany to resolve this and Ukraine so that they can have autonomy for their language, and it'll be somewhat of like a federation. They'll have devolved powers in the southeast in Donbass, but yet it'll still be a full sovereign Ukraine, sovereign borders. That was the proposal on the table. That was rejected over and over and over again. And there was going to be an escalation of war in the southeast. And this was ultimately the provocation. This is what Kamala Harris and Biden said. Well, they can do whatever they want. If they want to come into NATO, they can come into NATO. Every nation has a choice. It's like, no, you can't. We have the right to veto any nation coming into NATO, and we should have vetoed most of them. We've been constantly expanding NATO since the end of the Cold, since 1989, 1990. We've only pushed ourselves closer and closer to the brink of a kind of conflict with Russia, because that's the globalist agenda. Why? Because they want to wear down the two most powerful countries in the world. I mean, at the time, of course, China was still very weak, but militarily, in terms of nuclear capability, Russia and the United States remain dominant powers. China was meant to be just the globalist sweatshop for cheap labor. So Trump's deal is to outflank this entire agenda, the agenda of pitting the United States against Russia. The same Cold War divide and conquer that they used after World War II, the same thing they engendered then with the expansion of NATO since the end of the Cold War, this kind of liberal international rules-based system. The US and Russia are supposed to be permanent enemies and supposed to be in total conflict. And that destabilizes the world, it destabilizes a system of nations, and it very much weakens the United States. Invert it like Trump said in December at Mar-a-Lago with Zelensky when they did a press conference there. And Trump said, I talked to Putin for 2 hours today. We talked about how the Russia hoax disrupted the potentials of US-Russia collaboration, because Russia was there backing us in the Revolutionary War. They were there literally in this New York and San Francisco harbor in case that the British and French came in on the side of the Confederacy during the Civil War. So the idea that the US and Russia might collaborate is not a far-fetched idea. It's most of 19th century American history. So Trump is turning it on its head, and he sees the potential. It squeezes China. Like someone said in the chats earlier, if China doesn't get discounted oil from Iran and Russia and Venezuela any longer, China's got a different kind of situation economically, because Trump wants China to come to the table on fair trade terms, not this globalization, big communist corporation of China kind of controlling and manipulating global supply. He wants them to come on the table and work with other nations, including the United States, on a fair trade economic system. Squeezing their energy prices is a major factor. Russia doesn't want to be entirely dependent on China. They'd like to have a market back in Europe again. So I think the US-Russia flank is huge. I think Trump is avoiding that flank or that trap, but he can't walk away from it. He's got to solve it. And there's massive pressure, and the Ukrainians are tough. They're going to fight this thing all the way through. And it's not like we want to injure the Ukrainians. What has injured the Ukrainians has been this neoliberal obsession of war with Russia, where they were going to basically destroy Ukraine to basically provoke a war with Russia. That wasn't good for Ukraine. We've got to develop Ukraine as a sovereign, strong, capable nation. That's where Ukraine used to produce the rockets for our space program prior to this war. That's what they produced largely in the Southeast. It was an advanced industrial and scientific country with some of the best farmland in the world. So this goes back to the mission: sovereign nations, economic development, and ending this idea of permanent war and permanent conflict. And I think that's what we've got to achieve in this question. And Trump sees it. It's the perfect pivot. And if we create that kind of collaboration, then problems in the Middle East are going to be easier to solve. You're going to have a more stable world. I mean, how much did the threat of nuclear war in the Cold War suffocate this kind of American system, this kind of American spirit from spreading around the world? It had a huge effect. Would we have gotten sucked into Vietnam if there hadn't been a US-Russia, US-Soviet divide? Now, I'm not saying there weren't disagreements with the Soviets. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is that this kind of constant threat of nuclear holocaust or nuclear war or world war prevents the kind of development that the globalists seek. They don't want nations to develop. They want them weak and easy to control. And I think Trump sees that this Ukraine pivot is huge. That's why he's got to clean up the Middle East. He can't allow these disruptions. We're going to end this empire. We're going to end this globalist agenda by creating a kind of thriving system of nation states. And probably the Ukraine is perhaps the biggest pivot point to do that. So I think it's on the agenda. And that's what's amazing. To me, it's amazing Trump went into Iran knowing all of that. I think all of that's somewhat obvious. Knowing all of this, knowing the midterms, he decided to move aggressively on Iran. It's an incredibly bold move. And I think we've just got to back up that kind of leadership, because that's the kind of courage and risk you've got to take if you're going to beat these bastards.
Thank you, Mike. Quick final questions here. This first one's here, a longtime supporter, one of our first supporters, Jerry. Andrew meant Adam. Checking in every once in a while, wondering what the total subscribers are at. Never hear you address it. Tired of asking. Alohas. Thank you, Doc. And here from Dennis. Could you tell us approximately how many members, followers we currently have? I'd like to use that info when talking to people about Promethean Action and requesting appointments for your delegation to the Congress in April. So that's another thing too. We're going to be going to Congress in April. Please, everyone, get on our email list. We're going to tell you more about the details soon. We already have a bunch of people that are trying to get meetings for us across the country. So, YouTube, we are we're less than 4,500 subscribers away. That's the live count. If you are not subscribed to our channel right now, please go ahead and click the subscribe button. Help us reach 500,000 followers on YouTube. We've literally done this in a little bit more than a year. Thank you, everyone, so much for your support. And our email newsletter we're reaching 130,000 subscribers across the world on our email list. If you want to get on our email list of over 130,000 subscribers from across the world, please, everyone, the link is in the description. We got so many more super chats, so many more questions here. Thank you, VNA. Thank you, Nomis Under. Thank you, Thomas Jason, Jack Ace, Farsha, Cosmic Dragon Awakening. Thank you so much for your question. I'm sorry we just didn't get to it today. Thank you, James. Thank you, Robin. Stephen, thank you for sending in your question. We have a friend from Ontario. I'm sorry we didn't talk about Canada today, but I have a Canadian friend saying it's the Americans that are coming in building SMRs and a port at James Bay to get around the Quebec block of oil. Thank you, Karen Tov. Thank you, Catherine, for your question. I don't know if we had a deep state back then. And thank you very much, Salith. And thank you, everyone in the chat, for joining us every week. We should be back next Thursday with Susan. She is recovering right now. I believe she's going to see everyone's messages of thanks. If you want to follow Michael Steger, you can check out his x.com at StegerMG. He also does our Monday strategic overviews. If you go to Promethean Action's website, you can check out his strategic overviews. I'm sure he also talks about it on his Twitter too. So he does our Monday strategic overview. So he's been a long time. He's been with us since the very beginning. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And any final words for our audience, Barbara and Mike, before we close today's show?
Well,
go ahead, Barbara.
I'm not going to say much more because we've covered a whole lot. I just keep reminding people there is turbulence when you're breaking the sound barrier, but it's calm on the other side. And we got to get through that, turbulence and break the sound barrier and create a new system, because the old one was broken, which is exactly what we're doing.
Yep. I just got an announcement. Looks like Trump got some of the nations in Europe and Japan to support opening up the Straits of Hormuz. He just keeps moving, man. He's got the leverage. Let's keep going. Let's keep winning.
So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.